Hello, my name is Rhoda Eileen Kofi. I'm from Lincoln Community School. I'm a teaching assistant for grade 4. And my teacher action research was on effect of repeated reading on fluency and comprehension. I made a research, and then I found out that for the Association of International Schools in Africa, we have about 206 international schools with members from different countries. And there are about 80 full school members, 34 affiliate schools, and 92 associate members. And Lincoln Community School happens to be one of the full school members. And in our school, I also found out that there are 752 students from 63 different countries. And these students speak different languages. But the main language of instruction in our school was English language. Yet we had students in class that had difficulty in reading. And because of that, it brought up this urge to research on that. So I realized that students who didn't have any idea in English language and therefore had English as an additional language, they had a lot of difficulties in reading fluently and understanding whatever they read. And this situation had proven to be a setback for the teaching and learning process. So this brought up the question, then how does a student's repeated reading of any given text influence their fluency and then their comprehension? I did a little research, and then I realized that there are various researchers that came up with different things on repeated reading. My research was mostly about how students could use the repeated reading to influence their fluency and comprehension. So I found out that there were postulates that supported that repeated reading of any text could help to improve the students' skills in reading well, and then in reading quickly and reading with expression. And there was another postulate that stated that when you use repeated reading for students, they are able to understand any text that they read. However, there was a gap in the relationship between the student's own interest in the text that the student was reading and the motivation. Was there any motivation for the student to read more or to read well? And then there was also a gap between the student's interest and then engagement. I wanted to know whether they were really engaged in the reading. And then there was also a gap between their interest and then the comprehension, how best they could understand. I also realized that other people, their focus on the repeated reading was that students could read more words and they could read faster and accurately. However, there was a suggestion by other researchers that it is important that every struggling reader who attempts to read any text we consider that the text that they're reading is interesting and not boring. So this meant that for any student to be engaged in any repeated reading, we should make sure that the text that they are reading is very interesting. They like it themselves. We shouldn't just choose text for them, because if they are not into it, it will even hinder their fluency. It wouldn't even help them to understand anything. They will just be out of context. So it's better to do that. Now, when I started research, this was the method I used. The research actually was about 3 students in my class that I was working with. Some of them were for the learning support. It wasn't just English they had problems with, but they had problems with other subjects. However, because English was the main language of instruction, they needed to have the basis, read well, understand what they are reading, so that they could apply it to the other subjects that they were learning. I also had students who had English language as their first language that they were learning. So they had a lot of difficulty pronouncing words when they came across unfamiliar words. So this was around these 3 students. And then 3 teachers were doing this together because we had the main homeroom teacher and I was assisting the homeroom teacher, and we had the learning support teacher who also came in to pull these students out. And so the text that I used in investigating this was provided by the learning support teacher. He had some text that we had to use to find out how this repeated reading was going to influence the students' comprehension and all that. And some of the tools that we used were graph sheets, the text, and we videoed the students whilst they were reading. We videoed them sitting, when I was sitting with them. And then this project took 8 weeks for the data to be collected. So that's all. The main, what we actually did was for each text, we had one text that a student was supposed to read per week. So the students read the same text over and over again for that week. And whenever the students read that text, what we did was we had a timer. We timed the number of words that the student is going to read per the first minute of reading. And then we recorded it. And afterwards, there was a graph made for the number of words against the time. And then we also had comprehension questions that were given to the students. Because sometimes when they were reading and you tried to find out whether it was going well, they were getting it, they would say yes. But you realize that after answering the comprehension questions, you know that no, they didn't really understand the text. So we realized instead, reading the text over and over again was more useful. And they read the text each day, but the comprehension questions they answered 4 out of 5 days. So Monday to Thursday, they answered the comprehension questions, and then Friday was free from comprehension questions, but they still read on the Fridays. So that's what it was all about. So,
go back.
As the reading progressed, the students were given 3 to 5 seconds for correct word pronunciation. Because you realize that when they found any unfamiliar words, they either wanted to skip it, or they were waiting for you, the teacher, to just pronounce it. But I gave them that space to try and pronounce it themselves. So after the 5 seconds, if you are not able to do it, then I attempt to pronounce it for them. And then I also found out that when they were reading, they were answering the comprehension questions, there were times that they didn't understand certain words. Meanwhile, when they were reading, and I saw that these words looked quite bigger or unfamiliar with them, I asked them, do you understand this word? Or the child would say, yes, I understand. But they really didn't. So I also helped them to develop the skills of the use of the dictionary, how best they could use the dictionary to understand the meaning of words, and then it would be easier to answer the questions. Now I use triangulated data to collect my data. I use artifacts, interview, and observation, as I said earlier on. So the artifacts were the texts with the stories, and then the comprehension questions, and then with the interview, it was a written interview, a questionnaire. We had a questionnaire that the students had to answer to find out how the reading was going, whether they were understanding the text, and so on. And then I also observed them while they read, and then I had some of my colleagues coming over to also observe, so that I had another person's opinion about what they think about how the children were getting engaged in the reading, whether they were parts of it, they were understanding and all that, so that I had a bigger picture of it. This is one of the stories that all 3 students read. All 3 students read the same text because we really wanted to see the differences in each child's reading ability. So when they read, this is the graph that we made per each week to find out whether the number of words they were reading compared to the number of days, whether they were really getting fluent by each day. And we realized that, yes, sometimes they were moving up, but for other students, it wasn't always moving up along the grade. So for this student particularly, he moved up, came down, moved up again. So we realized that there might be factors for this. Yeah. The reasons, this student also had some ups and downs and later was on track. And I tried bringing all three of them together, and this is how it looks. So this could even tell you that the students, even though it was working for almost all of them, it wasn't the same for all of them because they are different students and they have their uniqueness. These were some of the interview questions or questionnaires that I gave them just to find out how they were coping with it. And some were, why are you reading this text? What is your goal? What images can you visualize using text details in order to build your understanding? What do you do when you are stuck on a word? What connections did you make with the information in this text? What if there was no comprehension question added to this passage? Would you be able to show or tell your understanding of the text? If yes, how? What information could be researched to deepen your understanding of the text? And let's see the answer for one of them. One of them said, my goal for reading this text is to become a better reader. And then, with the title of the topic, he said, the barrier reef looks, so we're trying to let them connect themselves to what they were reading. So he said, a barrier reef looks like small pods trying to fall apart slowly. Just to know that if you don't know what a barrier reef is, before you started reading it, can you tell what is it after you have read? Maybe you have no idea, you haven't come across it anywhere, but from the text you read, how do you connect to it now? So that was the answer that came up. And then the answer to the question that what do you do when you're stuck on a word? One said that I could break the word into smaller words and try to sound them in bits. And this was a skill that I taught them through their reading. Because when they came across unfamiliar words, I'm like, take your time, just pause, take it. You can either put 2 letters together at a time or 3 letters together at a time. Just take it in bits, break the word into maybe the bigger word into maybe 3 smaller words, and then take it a portion by portion, and then after that you try to bring everything together. So it meant that some of them got that skill and then they were moving ahead with it. And then another answer was, the Great Barrier Reef being one of the great wonders of the natural world reminds me of my visit to the Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa. And then it was a spectacular scene. So as much as possible to make the reading interesting, we want them to connect it to their own world, and then that will help in the fluency, and that will help them understand the text better. And another one's answer was, yes, I'll be able to show my understanding of the text without comprehension questions by taking my time to read clearly as I respond to the punctuations used in the text. I also taught them the skill of how to respond to punctuations, so you don't just read through. Because sometimes you think, oh, this student can read well, but they wouldn't pay attention to any punctuations, and that makes it difficult for them to understand what they are reading. But if they are able to really pay attention to it, oh, there's a pause here, there's an exclamation here, which means this or that. So I helped them to come up with that. And then the last answer to the question was, I would research on why the Great Barrier Reef is one of the great wonders of the natural world. So we're trying to push them ahead. After reading a book, if there are any wonderings, what do you do about it? go ahead, don't just put the book down and say, yeah, I'm done with it. But after reading it, and you come up with any wonderings or any questions, you go ahead and research. So more or less making them inquirers too, not just good readers. Right. So this is the result of the data I collected. I realized that students improve their skills in reading accurately, quickly, and with expression whenever they were involved in any repeated reading of any text. And then also they were able to answer comprehension questions correctly. But one challenge that I came across as I was doing my research is that at one time I asked one of my students to read and he was so reluctant. And then I tried to motivate him to read. He read at a point and said, I'm tired, I can't read again. I said, why? He said, it's boring reading the same thing over and over again. I read this on Monday, I read it on the same thing. I'm just... So I asked him, do you remember we had a goal for reading? He said, yes. Are we really achieving the goal? Yeah, we are, but I think it's still boring. So it was a challenge. It was very boring reading the same thing over and over again. And then one good thing is that when you allow the students to read a text that they are interested in, you give them the opportunity to read a text that they are interested in, then it will be very effective during repeated reading. So I realized that then, even in choosing a text, you should seek the opinion of the students. Yes. You should hear them out, ask them, will you be okay with this one? You don't just collect the text and then put it on them. You are supposed to read every day. Let them have a choice. Pick from a number of texts to read. And then if they are interested in it, it will work well. Even if they already have books they want to read themselves, or text in their homes they want to read, you can even allow that, because that will make the activity more interesting, and then you'll be able to achieve your goal. So I was saying that this area of repeated reading will be worth pursuing in our classrooms, trying to give them what they are already interested in to read, not just giving them text, any text to read. Right. And then one good thing they also learned were skills on how to pronounce words. So trying to break the words up in bits and sounding the words syllable by syllable. And then students were able, I realized that the strategies that I taught them, they were able to use it in other reading activities. Even when they had reading clubs, and then they were reading with friends, and go around to observe what they were doing, you realize that they were applying the same thing. Because from time to time, though they were reading silently during the reading club sometimes, you go there and then you ask them to read aloud for you to hear them out. Ask them a few questions about what they just read, and you realize that they were using some of the strategies even there. Alright. Again, I realized that reading silently is as important as reading aloud. For the repeated reading project I was doing, most of the time I made them read aloud so that I could help them with the pronunciation. I could come in here and there. But there were a few times I allowed them to read silently. And what I realized is that when they read aloud to me and they were asked to answer the comprehension questions, yes, it went well, but when you ask them to read silently to themselves and answer comprehension questions, they answered them better. Because they were not reading to please you, they were not reading to satisfy what you are seeking from them, but they now tend to get more engaged and read for their own understanding. So I realized that the silent reading was also a key thing that you could consider when you want to take up this repeated reading exercise, and allow them to read silently to answer the questions. A few contributions that this research can have on the study of the body of knowledge is that whilst the repeated reading improves the fluency and the accuracy of the students' reading, it also can help teach specific reading strategies. Again, if it is used in a class, it would be best to employ the strategies during their dear time. In our school, we have dear time. It depends on the schedule of the teacher. Some have it in the morning, some in the afternoon. But dear time is a time where you have to drop everything and just read. You're dropping everything. It's a reading time. You just drop everything and read. It can also be used at times where they are having reading clubs. The reading club, sometimes we have groups in the same class. Sometimes we have groups with a different class, but on the same grade level, and then they read together. So depending on that, these strategies can also be used. And then there are times that we help them know the level of their readings, whether they are going up on their level of reading or they are coming down. And that is when we do the running records. They could also use these strategies during that time. And I also realized that it may be better to use it in the pull-out programs for EAL students, because for all the 3 students that I had, some were EAL students and some were learning support students. So it would really be useful for them than those who are already good in the reading. And then, okay, so basically that was the outcomes of the research. So repeated reading indeed is able to help with students' fluency and comprehension. But the students need to be motivated. They need some motivation. They need to have interest in what they are doing. Then it will make it work well. Thank you.